The Nigerian Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress have suspended a planned nationwide strike scheduled for today. The decision follows 2 days of talks with the federal government, resulting in a memorandum of understanding to address the cost of living crisis following the removal of petrol subsidy. The resolutions include a provisional wage award of 35,000 naira for federal workers starting from September until a new national minimum wage is formally agreed. A 6-month suspension of VAT on diesel, a commitment of 100 billion naira for high-capacity CNG buses, and more. The suspension of the strike provides a 30-day window for the MOU's implementation.
Arising from the withdrawal of subsidy on premium motor spirit PMS by the federal government and the resultant increase in the price of the commodity, the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress issued a strike notice, which elapsed, and they were forced to embark on a strike bill to commence on Tuesday, the 3rd of October 2023. Consequently, a meeting was called by the federal government to avert the strike, and after much discussion, the following agreements were reached. 1. The federal government grants a wage award of 35,000 naira only to all federal government workers, beginning from the month of September, pending when a new minimum wage is expected to have been signed into law. 2. A minimum wage committee shall be inaugurated within 1 month from the date of this agreement. 3. Federal government suspends collection of value-added tax VAT on diesel for 6 months beginning from October 2023. 4. Federal government accepts to vote 100 billion for the provision of high-capacity buses for mass transit in Nigeria, that is CNG. Provisions are also being made for initial 54,000 CNG conversion kits to kickstart an auto gas conversion program, whilst work is ongoing on the start of the state-of-the-art CNG station nationwide. The rollout aims to commence by November with pilots across 10 campuses nationwide. 5. The federal government plans to implement various tax incentive measures for private sector and the general public. After 30 days, if these issues are not implemented, we'll revisit all the issues. The workers at the state level will have organs in those places that use this as a benchmark to go towards the implementation. That's the essence of suspending a strike. When you suspend a strike, you return back to work. In some states, there are some measures. Some governors are paying 20, some are paying 10 to mitigate this already. So it is something that affects everybody. In some private sector companies, they are taking some measures. I can remember 1 or 2 banks that have fully implemented about 100% wage review. So it's not something that we are saying whether it will affect them or not. It will. And then it's a measure that is aimed at cushioning the effect of this harsh policy. Harsh policy in the sense that it was not anticipated, and it appeared at the fabric, of the source of existence of Nigerians. So that is a stark reality that is facing all of us. So how to face it.
Joining us now on the morning show to discuss the latest development between organized labor and the federal government of Nigeria is Dr. Sam Amadi, Arise News Analyst. Dr. Amadi, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Ruben.
Well, Dr. Amadi, you already know the details of the agreement reached yesterday. Now, labor is no longer going on strike. Our government is going to give 35,000 naira, to federal workers until the national minimum wage is agreed upon and implemented. 100 billion to be spent on CNG. But all of those details, But a part of it is that this a memorandum of understanding that was signed yesterday will be filed in court as a consent judgment. Now, what does that really mean? That's to just deceive us that, oh, an agreement has been reached, nothing can go out of this, because a constant judgment, out of court settlement, is based on the principle of consensus ad idem. So what guarantee do we have in this regard?
Well, thank you very much for having me. First, I think Labour must have insisted on this being filed, because the federal government is the one that took Labour to court to stop it from going on strike. And the court has not been able to vacate formally the interim order restraining Labour. So this agreement becoming a consent judgment means that the court will formally enter it as its decision. So it now becomes that the Labour and government has agreed on these terms, and therefore this matter is now struck out or settled on those terms. Now, what it does for Labour is that it protects Labour. If there's a breach of this and the Labour decides to go to court, go on strike, you can no longer speak in terms of, like the Attorney General said, that Labour is contravening the law and violating the order of the court, and therefore subject to be treated as a contempt of court. So in this case, there is not an agreement. It's now a court-ordered settlement, meaning the court is the one who says, now federal government, they're going to provide this 35,000 upgrade in earning for this amount of money. So any of those violations means that the federal government itself has violated a court order. It becomes binding and enforceable, and therefore Labour is free to react if government fails. Now the question is, would that be failure? I think that this is a last-minute, if you like, desperate move. Government would be very desperate to head off what was looking like a total collapse. We see that the maritime workers, including those in the oil rig and all that, fully signed up. The deputy president himself is of that group, and they fully signed up to this. All the various formations in NLC are united, and TUC, to drive this strike. So I think government reasonably anticipated that, look, this is going to be a major failure on their own part, and I think they gave up probably more than they could have ever given if they were not going to be faced with this challenge. And that's not good for governance. I remember I'm a member of the original CNJ committee, and each of the meetings with the vice president, chief of staff, it looks so comical, nothing serious. So it's now when you're faced with a siege, threat, credible threat, that government responds. Labour itself is now also on a slippery slope, because many Nigerians will now see Labour as flip-flopping. But I think the burden of leadership, Amadi and his comrades, is that, or Shifo, TUC, is that they have to be pragmatic as well as strategic. And so I think that what I've done is to protect the workers, especially those who are in federal employment now, and maybe to be cascaded to those in the private sector and the states. But at the same time, have an eye of credible threat. If we just say we agree, and these governments generally, particularly the ones we have seen now, they are not able to follow through some of these commitments, because sometimes they are reaction to threats and not well thought out policy interventions to deal with what was going to be an obvious crisis. If you look at the logic of fuel removal, floating the naira, might make sense from a textbook economics. But again, the obvious fact is that they're going to have multiple impact we're seeing, very dangerous ones for economy, for private economy, for the global, for the national economy. And so they would have reasoned out a process for mitigating this crisis. I've been in that meeting, and what I keep telling them is that I don't think the government has a clear notion of what will be a palliative. What they have done now is more in line with palliative. A palliative must deal with the impact of a policy at real time. If you're going to ask people to pay more for fuel, which means they're going to pay more for transport, then the palliative must address that shortage in real income, which is what a grant of 35,000 naira, whether it's good enough, or whether only for 800 or so, less than 800 federal workers. It's not good enough to deal with the economy large impact. But at least, if you scale it up, that's more like a mitigation, and not rolling out industrial policies that are good for economic development. I mean, talking about looking for champions, industrial champions, support them, help them go global. Those are good, arguably good macroeconomic policies, but they're not mitigators for very concrete, time-bound, impact of fuel removal, subsidy removal. So I think Labour, in my view, wisely insist on this being part of a court, decision, so that once it's there, then the onus is on government to comply. Failure, which Labour will be free to go ahead with any action, and nobody will say that they are doing it in contravention of a court order, which damages their legal, standing and maybe tarnishes their reputation as an organized and civil union. So I think it's, in a way, win-win. But does it address the crisis in the sector? Maybe not. And does it, bolster the profile of Labour and government? I don't think so.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Sam Amadi. I'd like you to just analyze some of the agreements reached. Because here we're talking about them calling off the strike and or at least postponing it for the next 30 days to see how things will pan out, and the FG making promises. The first promise is 35,000 naira to all federal government workers until a new minimum wage is agreed on, which is, we're looking at next year, right? So 35,000, so let's assume that currently minimum wage for federal government workers is at 65,000 naira, and during negotiations, it probably would not be lower than 65,000 naira, hopefully. Now, point 10 as well talks about the fact that the federal government should also encourage at the NEC, state governments and the private sector to review their minimum wage. Can Nigeria afford a minimum wage of 65,000 naira? Not just at federal government level, but at state level. Because yesterday we talked about the fact that it puts pressure on the states, because the federal government staff cannot, or civil servants cannot earn at 65, and we're still earning at 30. In fact, some people are still struggling to pay at 30 in some states. How plausible is this? Is this realistic?
First, these grants or increase may look like Udoji Award. They have potentials for inflationary potential, meaning that people are going to, there's a generalized perception of more supply of money. And the impact would be that everybody thinks, oh, more money, prices will go up, well, let's get part of that. Even though it's given to a small subset of public officials, federal government workers, small, by some estimation from the system, it's about 700-something, thousand people, not up to 800,000. So that's a small subset of even the working class in this country. I'm not talking about the whole population. Two is that whether the financial, whether government can pay, is that I would have guessed that government would do the financials. And two key points here. One is that there's always this argument that government cannot pay X or B. But the question is, if you look at revenue and look at what government is spending in other areas, the question then is, can government really right-size properly and free resources to engage in paying a wage that has domino effects in consumption and therefore in production? If you look at a minimum wage and compare with West Africa, with 30,000 as it is right now, which is not all are paying, it's about maybe about less than $50 or $60 at most, depending on how the dollar is. In fact, it should be worse now with about $1 to 100,000 naira or thereabout. If you look at Chad, if you look at Niger, I mean, they're talking about some of these people have 112. Some have $89. So the question is that we are still very low. We can actually do better with minimum wage. It's true that Nigeria always has a financial crisis, a very deep one, and that's why we're doing all these things. But again, the question is, where do you start cutting the hair? You should start with where you have superfluity. You don't start with where you have inadequacy. So I would argue for real minimum wage increase, because it has impact to consumption, human development, and also economic production. There's a link with it. Very low minimum wage. And again, we're not even taking advantage of low wage difference in terms of production, so that we become an exporting country and we upgrade our economy. And then when we migrate to higher level production on tradable goods, then we can keep increasing our wages, and then we increase our technology, and then we move into a medium income economy. But what we are doing right now is that we are stuck with this starvation wage, and we're not optimizing in production the value of a low wage difference. So you have very bad wage, and then you don't even use it, and then you are decreasing the potential for human development, education, healthcare that feeds back to production. So I would argue that government should, review the minimum wage, but they should also be clear about the financials and show compensating framework. We're going to take out from this. We're going to remove this inefficiency so that at the end of the day, the difference might be less. You might actually gain more by the savings you are making from those corrupt and sometimes very frivolous, expenditures. There's a governor in Nigeria who, after receiving their 5 billion or 5 trillion, went and took about 5 billion, took about 60 top officials on so-called going abroad to look for investment as part of their own. Some governors are going to use their own to run for election. So there are many wastages we can curb. I think we need to improve human welfare. Again, the question is private sector. Are you going to, the policy of minimum wage is that how are you going to be able to, convince the private sector to probably match, the federal government in this generous minimum wage? Of course, some top companies will not expect to pay people 30,000 as minimum wage. They pay more than that. But what about SMEs and struggling businesses? Is there going to be a federal support for those businesses to keep workers at that level? Where would they get the money? So it's going to be a complicated discussion. And that's why I've argued for transparency. If we had put this on the table, this is what it's going to cost us to do X, Y, Z. This is what it costs us to do this. Now think about National Assembly. Why can't the National Assembly be run like any other public service in Nigeria, where you benchmark their earnings and every other allowances to exactly what directors or assistant directors are earning? So I think we can't eat like we can have it. If we are a country, as we are, poor, low, we have a revenue crisis, clear, and we have a debt crisis, clear, then we have to act as people who have those crises and not outsource risk to lower income people. That's really my problem. My problem is that the economy we are running is an economy of dumping refuge on the poor.
Okay.
Those who are not politically connected.
Okay.
And then we allow the rich to have their way. So I agree, it's financially
Okay.
difficult. We have to be transparent about
Okay.
it.
I mean, Dr. Amadi, I like to have this intellectual challenge back and forth, with you, because it's always stimulating. But I'd like to challenge your notion, and I see a lot of public affairs analysts have been couching this award around the Udoji Award. It's not true. Udoji Award was completely different from the outlook of this. There was already pre-existing inflation in the 70s before the Udoji Award came, and it was a total salary reform, and that further heightened inflation. This is just a very meager award for a period of time. So there's no base for comparison with this and the Udoji Award, because I've been hearing that narrative and I just needed to clear that out. Secondly, if you check the documents, there's nothing in the documents. So I don't know why Labour took the deal in the first place. There's nothing in the document. Imagine you're saying fast-track CNG. What does fast-track CNG mean? You say the kits will soon arrive. What does that mean? Is it smart? Are there timelines to it? The only specific thing is the 3 months and the 6 months award. You said, the presidential CNG initiative is already on. What does that mean? There is no precise, accountable even policy statements that we can hold them by. The only key issues that timeline was given is on the basis of, the 6 months, 3 months, and probably the VAT issue. So do you think the problem, because a lot of people, and would like to opine by saying, the problem is the lack of leadership in even Labour. Do you think that over the years, the leadership of Labour has greatly, the quality of thinking in Labour is suspect as we speak? Because 30 days time now, Mr. Joe Ajero will want to come and convince strike, but people look at him, it's become a joke. It's like child's play, like Chucky. There is nothing on the paper in the first place. What would you say as regards this?
Sure. I think, let me start by saying, let me start with the issue about Udoji. I think you're right that the facts are not the same, and this is a much more localized intervention. But again, if you look at narrative economics, Robert Skiller was good on that. It's about narrative. It's about virality. If the perception goes, civil servants have got money, then it's going to have the same impact. But that impact's an impact of perception, not really of the reality. When Udoji happened, people didn't take a calculator and say, how much does it increase real disposable income? Therefore, let's increase prices. No, this is viral. narrative economics. So you're right on the facts, but I'm saying that if you don't manage it well, you might actually see that a small support could create disproportionate impact in terms of how it distorts perception of the macroeconomics. Now, back to the issue of the NLC leadership. I think NLC has a problem because, look, first, they're demonized as the trade union wing of a Labour Party that, quote-unquote, lost a presidential election. And so the narrative out there is, look, Ajero and his team is out there to unstock this government, their movement to implement their plan. That's important. Number two is that there is people in the street baying for blood, say, look, go out there, Labour, let's go. Interestingly, civil servants don't want to go to job. Somebody in my household or somebody I knew said, why is this strike off? They want to be on strike. They don't want to go to work. But I think that the problem with NLC is that they need to develop a better bureaucracy around this issue. I agree with you. The only two precise things there are those two financial transfers or items that have timeline. The CNG, this government is not, in my view, ready for a CNG 100 billion. We've been talking about this I remember the committee, we keep talking about it. I'm not expecting any real movement in that direction. But the problem is that Labour should move away now from this idea of strike. Because, you see, strike is damaging, even to the poor. That's the truth about it. But the key thing they should do is now, can't Labour now be more political and strategic? Take government to court, mobilize political. For example, elections are coming in Imo, Bayelsa, off-season. Labour should understand that the political crisis is what is outsourcing these economic failures. So you don't put people in government who have no skin in the game, who have no commitment, who spend the story in town is that people are going to spend about 250 million if you want to win a House of Assembly, a House of Reps case in the tribunal. With all this corruption, how do you expect that you're going to have leaders who will respond to these basic challenges? So I think there's need for Labour now to grow into a strong bureaucratic in terms of skill set, in terms of structures, in terms of argument, in terms of engagement, in terms of building a constituency that has real discipline power over political actors. Because you can't be going to strike for government insensitive policies all the time. If you do that, the economy will ground the economy. If you don't do that, you lose reputation. So I totally agree with you that this is a signal for Labour to sit back and rebuild the intellectual base and become more political, not partisan, political. The crisis is a political crisis. Leadership that is not responsive, leadership that is not patriotic in terms of driving an economy in a nationalistic manner, and leadership that is self-serving. And so all these meetings in Villa will not cut it. Labour has to sit back and say, some cases we're going to go to court, challenge them, some are going to use the parliament, some are going to mobilize Nigerian civil society to say, look, how can you be saying X and doing B? If Labour does not mainstream its power into political, process and create political outcomes that favor a different kind of economics, different kind of management, then we're going to be stuck in Labour going into a strike and then fearing a loss of reputation or grip on its unions. Look, Labour is a democratic platform. If Ajero goes today, say we're going to do a strike, and government comes back to Ajero is bound to go back to NEC. NEC is going to review everything. And so you have to be very strategic and democratic, and sometimes you have to respond to what their affiliates are saying. So I pity a Labour leader trapped in a dystopian kind of public management that we have today, struggling for legitimacy, struggling for impact, at the same time conscious that we all should work together to ensure that this economy does not finally die. So I think it was really smart, or maybe unavoidable, that Labour has to pull back at this point and probably hope government. But my fear is that agreement, like I said, is not very grounded. It's not precise, apart from the two items. The rest are exhortatory, we will do, and so there's basically no sense in which we are seeing government seriously. I mean, not this kind of governance we are seeing across the country. For you to seriously care about these issues and do good faith engagement and come out and say, this is what it's going to cost us, this is what we're going to do, and this is a timeline for implementing all this. You need to have a Labour that itself is grounded in the dialectics of this struggle, and as well that connects to a larger public beyond just the unions and their workers. That's really the missing link right now.
Okay, Dr. Amadi, just to put this the way it is, are you saying that organized labor has succumbed too easily to pressure and hence has not really, in this instance, defended the interests of the same average, lowly grade Nigerian whose interest it is trying to defend. And second, on minimum wage, which is supposed to be the carrot that they are dangling, they are going to inaugurate a committee to look at minimum wage in the next 1 month. So it means that we'll be in this situation beyond 1 month, beyond 2 months. In fact, the last time minimum wage was negotiated, they were on it committee after committee for years. And then one of the items in the resolutions is that there's going to be a joint team that will go and inspect the refineries. Now, what purpose is that supposed to serve? The same refineries that they've been telling us they will fix, for more than 3-4 years. What do you think?
Okay, yeah. First, let me start with Labour. I think that Labour has not lost, reputation or lost capacity to lead the people, but I think they are facing a different kind of politics. Since 2015, when Buhari came to power, there's been a total collapse of the civil society, including Labour. You can see that many people got co-opted into government, and so that's why actually Buhari, with all that we now see happening, how many times did any civil society go to the streets, like under Jonathan? So there was a political shift. The progressives, quote unquote, bought the civic space as part of a struggle to unseat a status quo government. And I remember very well having this conversation with the likes of Claire Mwankwo, and I said, look, yes, the civil society can and should maybe oppose Jonathan's government for some policy, but the way they got, subsumed or captured by the opposition would destroy that competence, that neutrality to engage, and it happened. So Labour is part of that. All the civil society, Labour, everybody has lost a significant degree of credibility and strength. But the current leadership of Labour is facing the crisis that you are living now in a politicized and polarized politics. Not polarized on issues, polarized on identity, polarized on ethnicity, polarized on partisan, very broad partisan space. Whether you are obedient to Agbado or you are Baptist or whatever. And so the oxygen for the vitality is taken away. The third issue is that the Labour, that's what I'm advocating now, Analyst should now upgrade, to learn from the social movements in the US and elsewhere, and even in the Scandinavians, to now be a composite platform for workers, peasants, farmers, businessmen who are progressive-minded, so that together it constitutes a strong political disciplining force. So there's need for transition. That strategic thinking has to happen, and maybe it has not happened. This new leadership has been cautious. I watch their body language. They don't want to be trapped into a political cell. People say, oh, these are those opposition. Look at the way even journalism itself is not polarized, with people accusing some people who express their views as people who want to attack other people. So we're living in a difficult time. We need to create a difficult framework for managing that. Again, back to the issue of the minimum wage and some of the items. You are totally right when we talk about how nebulous, how ungrounded these issues have become. And so what I think is that somehow the federal government has bought a timeline, a time frame to survive what could have been a very dangerous for everybody, dangerous strike. And Labour probably has got something, if you pay for 3 months, 35,000 naira to all civil servants, that's significant money, especially for those who are, poor earning workers. That's a big chunk of victory for federal public service. So Labour will go and say half cup, government says half cup. So, but the real loser here is that the Nigerian people have not got a sense in which there's closure on very critical issues, like you pointed out. Go to the refineries and Labour has no capability to monitor the progress of work. And if it's not going well, what do you do? So those are niceties, those are part of government, processes. There's no guarantee that by December the refineries will be working, and therefore the price will come down. But I think Labour should henceforth prioritize what it can manage and leave policies that government is responsible for government, so that if those policies fail, Labour reacts not to be, waded into a policy complexity where Labour loses face. There should be a strategic sense in distancing itself, becoming there and say, this is what we want. You go and figure out how to get it done. We want the refineries to be working. Don't get us into a committee where we get compromised and then we become part of the failure of that process. I think it's a smart strategy that government uses to get Labour into the so-called committees, they work together, and then Labour will be stopped from coming back and saying it didn't work, but you were with us. You are part of those who did those things. So I think Labour needs to go back to the drawing board and refocus its strategy, knowing that this is now a politics that's both toxic, that's so full of manipulation, and where you're dealing with public officials who are more concerned with overcoming political hurdles than addressing the real challenges that the workers and the people of this country face. So I agree with those critiques, but asking myself, if I was Ajero, who's going to have this massive strike with all the attendant crisis, and I'm seeing one or two good, interventions from government, what will I do? Maybe the union will say, let's give them breathing space. And by the way, the cardinal policy of trade unionism and negotiations are once the government indicates credible interest to negotiate, the labor leaders are somewhat bound to agree to a credible process of negotiation. So in a sense, they did what trade unionism requires them to do, to say, call off the strike if government shows good faith, and then hold government. Now that it's in court, timelines matter. My regret is that most of the other items have no timeline. When are you going to bring the first CNG large vehicle? When are you going to start off the first conversion college? Those timelines would have been more effective in giving Labour control through a court-ordered judgment, in which case failure will be clear and then there will be consequences outlined. So I think they will do better next time, but they should take note of the change, the shift in the political economy and retool their strategies, and so you don't depend on disruptive strikes that have bad optics, but on other strategies that help you to control the behavior of those in public office. Strikes will always be there, I mean, even in the US, but then it shouldn't be the only and main option for dealing with a country that's as perverse, disoriented as we are right now.
All right. Thank you very much for your insights this morning, Dr. Sam Amadi. We look forward to having you again on The Morning Show.